Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, I wanted to have a quick video here to talk with you yet again about park effects. So I know we've talked about this before on this channel. We'll probably talk about it again in the future, but I thought it would be interesting to sort of at least mention it here today. There was a thread I saw in the OOTP development forums that was talking about park effects in the game and people's problems with them and stuff like that, and so I thought that we would look at a couple of things connected to them. We'll try to make this pretty simple, though, pretty easy to get. So OOTP has park factors that I believe are somewhat similar to what Baseball Reference does, but I don't know exactly how they are calculated. I believe that tends to be some sort of decimal rating with anything over 1 favoring hitters, under 1 favoring pitchers somewhat. Sort of similar, I suppose, to what happens with Baseball Reference, right? Baseball Reference has this thing where everything's normalized to 100, and so for Yankee Stadium, the batting rating 100, pitching rating 96. Why you have a separate rating for batting and pitching is honestly somewhat beyond me. I guess we could go here and try to figure out exactly why they do things the way that they do. I have actually looked through the park factor calculations before. And I mean, you know, it sort of is what it is. I am not a huge fan of the way that we do park factors in sabermetrics, but I'm going to sort of keep my complaints for a different form and a different time. I think that there's a lot that still needs to be looked at in terms of park factors and why they change. And it really has been a mystery, I will say this, for decades to figure out why park factors are the way that they are and how much of what we're seeing is really signal versus noise, right? It's kind of a thing. But there you go. You saw that for Yankee Stadium. It was about 100 for batters, 96 or something for pitchers, or 97 if you do the 3-year rolling average. 3-year rolling average makes a little bit of sense, but isn't really that good. You're trying to account for the sample size because you only have 81 home games a season. Yeah, we know, all right, so we know that ballparks do make a difference in baseball, but exactly how and exactly why and exactly what it looks like is something that's a complicated question, and it involves everything from, you know, the amount of humidity in the air and sort of the density of the air to what's going on in the neighborhood around the ballpark, the time of game, that the time of day that the game starts, to, you know, everything imaginable, you know, and that's stuff that can be hard to see. One problem that we always have that people, I think, forget with baseball simulators is that the correct way to apply park factors is to apply them in such a way so that the average park factor for every season ends up averaging out to 0, right? So we go look here at Yankee Stadium. You can see that the way that Diamond Mind will do this is it will have separate totals for singles, doubles, triples, and home runs. It has a somewhat small rating for singles, much smaller for doubles. Triples, a little bit better, especially if you're a right-handed batter. You ask why? Well, it's because left center field in Yankee Stadium, as we talked about earlier today, is absolutely monstrous. And then home runs for left-handed batters, it's a great home run park. Right-handed batters, not quite as much. Now, when you look at the physical distances, you wonder why, because it is only 301 feet in traditional Yankee Stadium to left field line. I guess the reason why is because of how big that gap is on the left side. So, you know, that might be kind of what's going on. Ideally, and I don't know if this is the case for 49 because I haven't been through the whole thing, but ideally, if we're going to go through every other American League park, we should see that it averages out, each of these factors averages out to 100, right? Assuming that you're playing an even number of games in every park, it should be the case that overall the park factors average out to 100. If instead, say, home runs were 150, you would expect to have 50% more home runs hit in your replay than there were in real life, right? You can see things are kind of crazy, right? Griffith Stadium, good for everything except for home runs, 34 for left-handed batters, 27 for right-handed batters. When we look at the physical layout of the park, we kind of wonder why that is, because this isn't exactly a monstrously large stadium, although the left field foul line being 405 feet away is kind of a long way away. You wouldn't expect it to have such a massive, you know, effect. I mean, so we just looked at this with Griffith Stadium, right? 320 feet down the right field line is kind of a long way away compared to Yankee Stadium, where it is 296 feet away. But then your question is, okay, that extra 24 feet, what difference does it make, right? Look over here at Comiskey Park as well, right? Which is, yeah, it's okay. Probably about average for left-handed batters for home runs, 79 for right-handed batters, so not as easy. Not a great park for doubles, a little bit better for triples. But again, when we look at Comiskey, now this is interesting, when we look at the physical layout of the park, this is after they took away the fences that were moved in, right? So we're still dealing with 352 down the lines, 353 in left and right. and only 415 in center, right? I mean, this is after you'll remember there was a video that we had earlier that talked about how they moved the fences all in about 20 feet to try to make a place for Pat Siri to be able to deposit baseballs. And instead, Pat Siri wound up going to the minors, and the White Sox changed it before the Yankees came into town because they were going to lose games left and right? Look at another big one, which was Municipal Stadium. We go look at its factors, and it's definitely not a hitter's park except for right-handed batters for home runs. And the reason why it's not entirely clear to me. Not though a much bigger park than Comiskey Park. I'm guessing that there was the fence that had been moved in before then. I don't know the history of the stadium over in Cleveland, but it's possible. I know that it's a big park in terms of the number of people there. You can play this game all you want. Now, what you'll notice again is these park factors are confined to singles, doubles, triples, and home runs. There are no park factors implicating outs. But we know from looking at this in the history of baseball that there are park factors for outs, that some ballparks are better for ground ball hitters, or some ballparks will induce ground balls, others will induce fly balls, especially Coors Field is one, I believe, that will see an outsized share of fly balls, which is one of the reasons why you'll get outfielders in Coors Field who look like they're the worst fielders of all time. It might not make a lot of sense for a left fielder to have the worst fielding system that we know of in modern baseball history, right? In contrast to this, there are other ballparks you can imagine that for whatever reason might induce batters to hit into ground balls. It's possible that the factors that involve like whether home runs are easily hit or not might have nothing to do with the actual dimensions of the park and rather have more to do with things that are in the batter's eye, like people sitting there with white shirts, which was often the case in Yankee Stadium, or big advertisements that get in your way or whatever, right? So there's a lot of like different and sort of, interesting and intricate things that go on with ballpark factors that are oftentimes very, very difficult to account for. As I've talked about before, sometimes you do get teams that will change the dimensions of the park in the middle of the season. Now, that really hasn't happened much since this happened last in 1949, right? They don't let you do that anymore. But we've had different teams try to come up with, different things to make the game more difficult. Some other interesting stuff that we'll get to later on as we talk about more about the history of baseball. For example, back in 1901, it may have been 1900, I think it was in Philadelphia in the old ballpark there. One day, one of the base coaches from the visiting team saw a little wire on the ground and pulled it up and ended up pulling the whole thing up and discovered that there was a huge contraption that was being used to relay signals from center field to the batter to let him know which pitch was coming. It didn't work very well because the Phillies weren't a very good team. But that also would, in theory, be a different type of ballpark factor. Another thing that we talk about and that has been talked about in the OOTP thread is walks and strikeouts, which also is influenced, interestingly enough, by the ballpark. Why, how, what's going on, it's hard to say. There is some concern that I would have that what you're actually seeing is the impact of the home team, which, of course, always will play in its ballpark. And even though there are people, including people who've commented on these videos before, who will swear up and down that we've already adjusted for all of this, I maintain that you probably haven't, and you probably haven't sat down and thought about it or taken a look at it. Might be some stuff for us to look into here in the future and see what we can come up with, sort of, doing the dirty science. Anyway, that's about it for me. I will talk with you again tomorrow. Bye.